The Detroit Red Wings had a very productive weekend, and they've been a different team since heading back from Sweden. Brian Fisher of Locked On Red Wings is here to talk about that and what this team needs to do to sustain their recent success. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 deposit match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Red Wings, Brian Fisher. And Brian, a nice 2-win weekend over the holiday for the Detroit Red Wings, including a big win over Boston and another win Sunday afternoon over Minnesota. This team seems to have really focused and improved since going over to Sweden. Talk to me about what the difference has been for the Red Wings since that trip.
I mean, what hasn't been different, Gil? Everything has been different. They've really turned it around. I remember, before we started recording, I was talking about if we had done this little crossover, I had come on the show last week after the Sweden series, I would have had completely different things to say because the team, despite the fact that at 5-on-5, they were generating more chances during that stretch, they just couldn't score first. If they did score first, they couldn't hold on to a lead. Their power play had just completely stalled, and defense and goaltending continued to be a massive issue. And those are not the makings of a successful hockey team. But since then, they've really turned it around. And with the exception of the Minnesota Wild, in which they did win 4-1, they've played really well at 5-on-5. They've generated a lot of scoring chances. But really, I think what has contributed the most to these high-scoring victories for the Red Wings is creating low-event hockey, which is something that doesn't surprise me because Derek Lalonde coming from the system in Tampa Bay, prides himself on a defense-first style of hockey, including, sometimes running 11 forwards and 7 D-man, which he's done multiple times this season, even when he hasn't had to. And it's worked out for the Detroit Red Wings in this stretch. The Devils game, that 4-0 victory that kicked off this new 3-game win streak and the Devils are struggling right now. They're definitely having issues in net. But they're still a team that has a high scoring potential. They outshoot attempt. They the Corsi metric that people love to throw out there. Like they usually outshot attempt teams by a wide margin, and they did so in that game against the Detroit Red Wings. But they only had 16 qualified shots on net because the Red Wings did a really good job of keeping those shot lanes to the outside the circles, above the circles, outside of dangerous areas, and they blocked 20 shots. They carried that over to the Boston Bruins game where, again, they started fast, they started strong, they brought a lot of pressure, forced turnovers, took advantage of them, scored on the power play, which is finally rejuvenated. They were like, I don't know the exact stat, so I could be off by a goal or two, but they were like 2 for 42 for a while there in the power play. They went from second best in the league to start the season to, I think, 31st in that stretch where they were 3-5-3. Now they've scored, I believe, a total of 5 power play goals in their last 3 games. They scored 2 against the Wild. I believe it was 2 against the Boston Bruins without having the box scores in front of me, and 1 against the New Jersey Devils, if I recall correctly. That's a huge change, and that's going to lead to a lot of success for a team that, isn't always going to be the best team at 5-on-5. And the Minnesota Wild game, again, is a perfect example. They just won on Sunday. They are outshot like 38-22 or something along those lines. And the Red Wings were able to score 2 power play goals, and that was really able to carry them to the victory. So it's just been a complete shift from how it was in Sweden. It's like the team finally came with a fire under their butt. The system that Lalonde's been working on maybe is finally starting to click because they brought in 11 new guys. So when they went through that lull, part of our thinking was maybe it's because like 11 new guys need time to adjust to a new system. They finally seem like they're clicking, and Alex Lyon in net has been really impressive as well.
Yeah, that was my next question. I mean, he really seems to have made an impact. It's small sample size so far, but 37 saves on Sunday against Minnesota. And, his numbers are just off the charts so far since he's been in between the pipes for Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, small sample size, right? So it's great that his numbers are great in three games played for him now. But you're right. In every single game that he's played, including the one that he lost in Sweden against Toronto, like he played really, really good hockey. The game, I have my thoughts about the scheduling in Sweden, first of all. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that the Red Wings were the only team to play back-to-back divisional opponents in Sweden. They lost their one and only home game against Toronto to the Sweden series. That was their home game against Toronto this season. I'm getting off on a tangent, but other team, the Maple Leafs and the Senators both got breaks after that first game. The Red Wings immediately had to come back to it. So in that third period, the Red Wings were exhausted, and Toronto was able to start pouring it on. The Red Wings are also down Jake Wallman in that game. So that loss and that blown lead is absolutely not on Alex Lyon, is basically what I'm trying to build up to here. He played fantastic in that game. He earned himself a second consecutive start because he came back home to Detroit, started against the Devils, only faced 4 high danger shots in that entire game where the Devils only got 16 through to him, but he still earned the shutout. He took care of business. And that's the thing that's the biggest difference maker right now. Whereas Ville Husso in that is the starter for the Detroit Red Wings so far this season. He's been very good at making these huge acrobatic saves, but he lets these little bleeders through. His glove hand's not the best. He gives up rebounds, but he'll make these ginormous saves at big moments. Alex Lyon, he's not going to do that for you, but what he has been doing is just swallowing the puck. When that puck gets to him, he swallows it and does not give up the rebound. Mickey Redmond said as much. And I think that is what has been so successful because he was tested in the game against Minnesota. I just said they had 38 shots against him. And while the Red Wings still did a pretty good job of keeping 27 of those 38 shot attempts outside of high danger areas, it's still a very good look for Alex Lyon that he's able to swallow those pucks whole. He made a lot of big saves. He's been great. I know he was great in limited action with the Panthers last year. He really kind of carried them to the playoffs, but kind of fell off in the playoffs before a Red Wings team that so desperately is in need for some kind of solution in net. Because Ville Husso hasn't been great. Like I just listed the problems with him. James Reimer hasn't been great. He had a couple good games, but you could see the cracks before it finally broke through on him. He's an aging goaltender. He's good for one start a week, maybe. But, it took Alex Lyon's patience and for Ville Husso to have a child for Alex Lyon to finally get that start in Sweden because Ville Husso had to leave Sweden, go back home to the United States to be with his wife for the birth of his child. That finally got Alex Lyon that chance in the crease, and he hasn't given it up. So, I mean, yeah, he's been like the biggest player in the 3-game win streak. Obviously, Husso got the win against Boston, but 2 of those were Alex Lyon.
What are the keys for the Red Wings to sustain this recent improved play and success?
Well, I mean, everything without sounding, this is a really tough division. I mean, I think you can have any of us lockdown hosts from the Atlantic Division teams come on and you can ask that question. They'd all say, everything, because this division is so deep that if the Red Wings want to stay in it, because let's face it, there are teams in this division that are better than the Detroit Red Wings. On paper, the Toronto Maple Leafs are a better team. The Boston Bruins, who, by the way, 2 of their only 3 regulation losses have come at the hands of the Detroit Red Wings. Just want to throw that out there. The Boston Bruins on paper are a better team. The Tampa Bay Lightning are an aging core, but a still very good core. And the Senators are off to a slow start. They're always off to a slow start. I expect them to come on eventually here. And the Buffalo Sabres are finally starting to turn it around. It looks like a little bit. Devin Levy maybe not being exactly what they were hoping for, but they're still a high-scoring team. So the keys to sustaining success is just being able to continue to have a power play that can convert and really insulate your goaltending. Like this team needs to learn how to play. I'm not worried about their goal scoring. I really am not, because they're 4 lines deep now. They don't have any high-end caliber scorers. They don't have an Austin Matthews. They don't have a Pasternak. They really don't. But they're 4 lines deep in that scoring. So I'm not too worried about that, but they need to learn how to play really good team defense to insulate goaltending. Because even with Alex Lyon's hot streak, I expect him to come back down to earth eventually. And they're going to have to insulate their goaltenders if they want to, maintain their position in this playoff race. I know it's wild to say playoff race this early in the season yet, but really in the Atlantic Division, every game counts. There's no game you can take off. So yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. I guess if you want to talk about keys to sustaining success, it's, I would say, power play, limiting penalties, because they've taken a lot of that, and then just insulate your goaltenders, man. You got to play good team defense around them.
Brian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast on YouTube, Megaphone. You can find it on Megaphone. Sorry, that's who hosts our podcast. Megaphone then outputs it to Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Red Wings. You can find me on Twitter at Brian Fisher, WWJ, and my co-host Scotty at Bentley Scotty. So we're a riot. You'll love us.
Always great to listen to and watch your show. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Gil. It's always a blast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Collective. If you run a solo small business, you're an army of one, but you still need a CPA, a bookkeeper, separate payroll solution, and more. Let Collective take care of the paperwork while you take care of the business. Collective is the #1 financial solution for freelancers, contractors, and self-employed entrepreneurs that lets you focus on your passion and not your paperwork. Let Collective handle all the paperwork you dread, like corporate formation and compliance, taxes, bookkeeping, accounting, and even payroll. The best part, it's at a fraction of the cost of a CPA. Collective knows that if your business of one makes over $80,000 a year, you will find the most value from their services. Join the thousands of solopreneurs who have saved an average of $10,000 per year on their taxes with their structure. Right now, Collective is offering 1 month free and no onboarding fee when you go to collective.com/LockedOnNHL and tell them Locked On NHL sent you. That's a $550 value for free when you go to collective.com/LockedOnNHL and tell them Locked On NHL sent you. That's collective.com/LockedOnNHL and tell them Locked On NHL sent you.